All right, so standard 6. We have finished up with standard 5 in regards to having the new document that is our nation's government, the United States Constitution. So the standard 6 approach kind of breaks down, okay, well, what happened with the first 5 presidents? And so it goes through George Washington, John Adams, and then Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe. So it's going to lay out the foundation in terms of the approach of our first leaders of this nation. So the first one, George Washington, you're familiar with the name, you're familiar with what you've covered in really elementary school, but also what we covered with Standard 5 in terms of being over or the presiding officer at the Constitutional Convention, Standard 4, leading the nation through the American Revolution. We even mentioned in Standard 3 how he learned a lot in the French and Indian War. So now it's from the approach of as the commander-in-chief, as the leader, the president of the United States, what precedences did he set? So what did he establish that other presidents would follow? And so we listed off, just being called Mr. President, not Your Highness or Your Majesty or anything along those lines. Just I'm in a lead, I'm in a position of authority. Mr. President is perfectly fine. Having a cabinet, and we mentioned having a diverse cabinet in order to bring different viewpoints. The Whiskey Rebellion allowing to we said Shays was weak, whiskey is strong. And so with Whiskey Rebellion, we have a strong central government. So now the Constitution does have the authority to be able to put down a rebellion. And so people need to follow what's in the Constitution. And then we mentioned the idea of remaining neutral or non-intervention as an approach for what future presidents could follow, and the 2 terms. So allowing for a peaceful transfer of office, so from one president to another, not anything like what often happened with wars and individuals trying to gain power through violence. It was just a peaceful transfer, and so that was pretty monumental historically. Then we moved on to John Adams. So John Adams kind of gets a little bit of a bad rap, especially in comparison to George Washington, in that John Adams, the 2 kind of controversial acts was the Alien Act and the Sedition Act. And we mentioned how the Alien Act made that naturalization process, the ability to become a citizen, it extended it from 5 years to 14 years. So almost 3 times the length to be able to now be an active participant of the new nation. And so that was clearly controversial, as well as the Sedition Acts, which were really unconstitutional because they said that if you speak out against the government, you could potentially be arrested as a threat. And so that violated the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights that we mentioned in Standard 5. Then it leads to the election of 1800, where John Adams does not have a lot of support. And so we watched the clip of the Hamilton musical and discussed how, Adams really wasn't going to win. And so it came down to Thomas Jefferson versus Aaron Burr, and the tie vote led to the House of Representatives having to decide, or really almost a point at that time, to say, now we are picking Thomas Jefferson because in large part, Alexander Hamilton gets a lot of credit because he was very influential and he supports Thomas Jefferson as the next president. Jefferson is the next president. He's our 3rd president, and the primary focus, it mentions a little bit about the strict view of the Constitution versus the elastic view, and in terms of, does that mean that we can interpret the Constitution how we want to, or do we simply just focus on what it says and that's all the federal government can do? And so that was a minor portion of the standard, but he expands presidential power because he allows for the purchase of the entire Louisiana territory, which initially it was just focused on New Orleans and just gaining that port. But then the purchase, it ends up doubling the size of the United States. And so that's huge. And despite being for the common man and for states' rights, he did expand the power of the executive branch. Then it leads us to our fourth president, And so we've got James Madison that comes in, and he's got a situation that it's really the same situation that Thomas Jefferson was dealing with, but Madison is to the point where it's like, all right, enough is enough. And so the War of 1812 happens because the British still had forts, right on the northern border of the United States, and so that was problematic to have someone that you fought with, not that long ago, to still have forts nearby, and so that was an issue, as well as the British were really restricting a lot of trade, and so we couldn't make a ton of money because the British were trying to stop us from trading with France and other nations. And the major concern is the British policy of impressment. And we said impressment was when merchant ships or sailors in general were being taken, so basically kidnapped and forced to serve in the British Navy, which obviously infringes upon freedom of trade, just freedom of movement or transportation. And so it's something that the United States had to take a stand. And the War of 1812, we said, is somewhat known, as the Forgotten War, but the significance is the United States stood up against the British by themselves, and you could call it a tie, but basically we didn't lose. And so if we're able to stand up against the number one power in the nation at that point in history, then that says, we could stand up to anybody. And so we get this national identity that, I am an American. I'm proud to be an American. And so that emerges from the War of 1812. And we also watch some really good and some really bad performances of the Star Spangled Banner, or our national anthem. And so that was written during the War of 1812. The last of the presidents discussed, it's mainly just focusing on the Monroe Doctrine. So after the War of 1812 is over, you have the era of good feelings, and so we're at peace, and the economy's doing well, and all of that. But the focus of the standard is the Monroe Doctrine, and we broke it down and said, you stay out of the Western Hemisphere, we'll stay out of your business. So basically, you stay over there in Europe, we'll handle things over here. Don't come in trying to make new colonies. Don't try to enforce any type of policy over here. And that establishes our foreign policy really from that point in history to now in regard to involvement in other nations.